Are people who like to play their Nintendo Switch on the TV in docked mode getting the short end of the stick from the Nintendo Switch 2? That is a concern I have seen expressed multiple times from people surprised that there was no effort made whatsoever to talk in the new Switch 2 presentation about improvements to TV mode, and you have to wonder why that is. One fear is that the new games just aren't that big a graphical step up when played on the television, but this does seem unlikely. I know Nintendo likes to soft pedal on power a lot, but this is mainly when they're making a blue ocean step sideways. The Wii and Switch were both hugely innovative consoles, but power-wise were very much behind the competition, and even the Game Boy was well behind the level of finesse Sega were able to achieve in the handheld space just a year later with the full colour but far more battery-hungry Sega Game Gear. But the Wii U, GameCube and 3DS all took big strides over their predecessors, if not compared to the competition, and I don't think that we should write off a healthy power bump from the new system. However, the talk of power has never been to Nintendo's advantage. Whatever number you issue, it's never going to compare well to the competition, and there would always be someone saying it is not powerful enough. That's why I think they are happy to just not talk about this sort of stuff until it's buried in a broader announcement, and there just wasn't enough breadth in this specific announcement to allow space for specs. Also, a 1440p or even 2160p mode would be dependent not just on the system itself, but on the television it's plugging into. And of course, Nintendo has no particular interest in promoting new televisions as part of their advertising campaign. That is particularly true with 4K, where take-up is still low enough that it's not yet a market standard. I seem to find lots of different and mostly contradictory assertions on the take-up levels of 4K televisions in different regions, and I guess it's probably hard to track, as likely a small number of people are buying multiple 4K televisions, while the second-hand market may also contribute to their spread in a more subtle manner that might not be picked up. A Statista 2024 survey put it at 26% of people who have a 4K TV, and that's in America, which tends to be ahead of the curve for these kinds of things. Of Japan's something like 55 million households, I've seen it quoted that 12 million had 4K-enabled televisions by 2020. So basically, we're looking at less than half and perhaps closer to a quarter of their market who could utilize the enhanced image technology that they would be offering. That's not an argument for Nintendo to duck 4K. After all, they will want to sell this console a decade hence, and as people replace televisions, it is likely that 4K will inexorably become the standard. But it is a reason why they had no incentive whatsoever to confuse the message of their system by harping on about image specs in docked mode. However, they might have done this still if docked mode was still a major way that people played, but I wonder whether it still is. Early on in the life cycle of the Switch, Nintendo shared this infographic related to gameplay trends for Japan, the US, and Europe. This demonstrated that while many people enjoyed playing in both handheld and docked modes, there was a significant portion, 30%, who enjoyed handheld mode primarily, while a smaller percentage were playing primarily docked, less than 1 in 5 people. This information, while I'm sure accurate in the literal sense, also needs to be considered in its fuller context. Nintendo in October 2017 were very much trying to convey the benefits of their hybrid approach, and for many people who were buying the system, the novelty of a system which docked and undocked was such that I'm sure in the space of 6 months, the majority of people would have tried both modes fairly extensively. However, many years have passed and it's not something which Nintendo has continued to comment on. Partly this is because they have no reason to, but I also greatly suspect that handheld play has become the standard for a vast number of people. Personally, I seldom, if ever, connect to a dock, and Switch Lite owners couldn't if they wanted to. The Switch OLED model did have some benefits for wired internet play, but the primary benefit to this system was clearly for handheld play, with the smaller bezel and the OLED screen. It also seems striking to me that Nintendo's plan to evolve the Switch never seemed to focus on docked play. There are obviously games which are better played docked, like Mario Party and Ring Fit Adventure, but these are relatively few and far between. Moreover, there was the obvious potential that was never taken up of doing a dock-only version of the Switch. If they could sell the original Switch for $300 and still make a profit, imagine how much they could have made by stripping out the screen and just selling a box with withered tech and a Pro Controller to people who really didn't want the handheld features. There are lots of reasons I'm sure why they never did this, not least that they didn't want to split their market up too much, but I'm also sure that it at least occurred to them as a possibility, and the fact that they never went near this has to do, I suspect, with docked mode being a relatively niche way to play, and so the potential market for such a console being much smaller. Of course, it's not an either-or. The whole point of a hybrid is that while some consumers will have a strong preference for one or the other, the system supports both options. And yet, if handheld is the primary way people are playing, then it makes complete sense to launch trailers such as this one, which emphasize the benefits in handheld primarily. Moreover, the Switch has for a long time been in the most direct competition, not necessarily with the likes of the PlayStation and Xbox, whose power profiles have until now far exceeded the Switch, which is often a secondary console, but with handheld devices like the Steam Deck and ROG Ally. None of these have yet penetrated the market in a major enough way to cause consternation at Nintendo Towers, but surely there is a substantial chance in the next decade, during which they would want the Switch 2 to be predominant, that some upstart device will manage what Sony did in the mid-90s and enter the scene in a massive way. And of course, that competition could include both Sony and Microsoft themselves. Therefore, if you're looking at developing and future-proofing your new console, the battle for the greatest specs would already have been lost, even if Switch could approximate the PlayStation 5 performance, which seems hugely unlikely. PlayStation 6 is just around the corner. But the battle for the handheld space still requires a very robust offer from Nintendo, and I suspect that's why it seems to be the focus of their attention so much. Now, I think it's 70% likely that the April Direct will give us specific details on specs like this. In a major presentation, you can afford to spend time on this stuff, and you can stream the presentation in a higher resolution if necessary, which in itself would be exciting and would allow for the benefit of docked mode still to be shown. But what resolution will the new console achieve? I'm not really one for specs and tech, and so I'm a little hesitant to get into forecasting specifics. I haven't particularly followed the various rumours about power and what this might mean for the company. Despite there being so many leaks and rumours hailing down in the last month that I've had for the first time several videos on the bounce discussing them, I still, believe it or not, do duck most of the stuff that pops up, except where it has a new idea that is worth discussing, or in some cases where it seems so credible as to be flat out true. So I'm sure you can find more leak-informed takes on the internet about this, but I try to look from the outside view most of the time of what would make sense for Nintendo, and just from an outside consideration, it would feel very odd to me if Nintendo didn't future-proof their device by offering enhanced graphics, and with upscaling technologies allowing for better-looking visuals to be rendered without a commensurate boost in the required processing power. I would say it feels like only a 30% chance that 1080p will be the maximum Switch 2 output, irrespective of how this particular trailer makes it look. Now, that could just be 1440p, which for a lot of people I'm sure will be absolutely great. As for pushing as far as full 4K, I'm not sure that this is something that Nintendo is likely to be especially bothered about themselves, but equally, it is something that competitors can hold over them for a decade to come if they don't permit it. Just as motion controls and touchscreen gaming were not the exclusive preserve of Nintendo systems for too long in the mid-90s, I think other companies will look to emphasize hybridity in their handheld offerings going forward. Nintendo's mouse mode feels to me like not just an innovative way to play to maximize the potential of the Joy-Con for different gameplay styles, but also a terrific pitch for PC gamers to come over. Call of Duty is a massive franchise, and the potential for people to play this on the go as well as in docked strikes me as a particular opportunity to flip the conversation innovation on handheld PCs in Nintendo's direction for at least a short while. But many such players will have strong preferences for graphical fidelity, and so I think just being able to use the word 4K in relation to the Switch 2 version would be a key differentiating factor. Now, we all know from the Nintendo Switch that what the system is capable of achieving is not necessarily what the machine will routinely output. So I think the likelihood is that this will be rare, and perhaps for the cost Nintendo won't see the benefits to it. It's also the kind of thing that could be integrated into a mid-gen refresh, especially if the handheld PC scene grows in the coming years. Ultimately, though, the key consideration will surely come down to cost. Nintendo wants to keep its machine relatively low cost while making a tidy profit, and that's going to be tricky at the best of times. If 4K is going to drive up prices for a majority of consumers who won't use the feature, while only appealing to people who are, at best, on the periphery of Nintendo's target market, the kind of people who really play PC games but might pick up the odd Nintendo title, then it would probably not be worth it. But if there is strong pressure from their third-party collaborators, which there probably will be, and especially from Japanese companies like Square Enix, Capcom and Bandai Namco, with whom Nintendo does a lot of business, as well as pressure from more tech-loving developers in their orbit, such as Masahiro Sakurai, then I could see them making more of an effort. Therefore, I would say that 4K feels 50% likely, although whether all games would run at this resolution, well, that strikes me as a much longer shot. For my previous deep dives into aspects of Switch 2, do check out the videos on screen. Thank you so much to everyone who watches, comments, likes, subscribes. Do check out some of the exclusive content on Patreon, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.